keep and dip into when we need. You don't have the right to ask where you go at night. Let the waves sit my head to think someone's in your bed. I get a little bit Genghis Khan. I don't want you to get it on with nobody else but me. With nobody else but me. I get a little bit Genghis Khan. Don't want you to get it on with nobody else but me. With nobody else but lights, they glow like I just lost the World War, and the scene slips away to the evenness I fade. It's a shit world, 'cause I don't really.
Brian, I have a quick question.
Yeah, what's up?
So because we're not worrying about styling, how do you feel about gems that gives you a user interface on top of your database? Something like active admin, but maybe something smaller than that.
Interesting. I don't know much about active admin, but what it sounds like to me is that it's more than just styling. So I imagine if something's called admin, it's probably has something to do with like creating admin users or managing user profiles. Does that sound right?
Yes, I used it a little bit years ago, and it does have all that functionality, but the key thing that I want to pull out is that it, like, I guess it's doing a lot more than we need right now since we're all learning, but I guess I'm just asking now just to get the question out the way.
Yeah. When you said styling earlier, when I hear styling, I think of like just the visual components of the app, so like the HTML and the CSS. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it's like it gives you a user interface. It's like for all the like having links to each of your resources. That kind of
Gotcha.
thing.
Yeah, I would. So my feeling on gems in general, and more of like, I guess this is we're now kind of talking about dependencies. I prefer not to add dependencies if I can. So for instance, I don't want to add a whole big dependency if I only need part of it. So when I hear something like active admin, and it sounds like this is just an example, but I wouldn't use that if I'm really just trying to do styling, if I want a gem to do styling. So for styling, I'm fine with any gems you want to use in terms of styling. But with all gems, if you're not sure, just ask if you can use a specific gem.
All right, so I guess one more piggyback. So like Bootstrap or Foundation, can we use those?
Yeah, Bootstrap. I don't know about what Foundation is, but let's just gem Foundation.
Foundation's not a gem, it's just a framework.
Well,
It's like Bootstrap, it's just lightweight.
Oh, I have heard of this. Oh, yeah. Yeah, this would be totally fine to use.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. If you joined a little bit late into that conversation, no worries. Yeah. So let's go ahead and talk about our first project, which is going to be relational Rails. So let me actually take a step back and go back to backend home here. And I am screen sharing, recording, question mark? Yes, yes, recording. Cool. So module 2, projects. And then our very first one is going to be a pair project called Relational Rails. So right off the bat, I will say that this is a pair project. Our idea here with this being a pair project is that we really want to start off the mod with kind of like that spirit of collaboration in mind. So I think some of you have already been vulnerable with me already and said like, is it okay that I feel like I have no idea what's going on, or that this like feels like it's a lot and I don't know how to keep track? That is what I would expect for the first couple weeks of mod 2. And really, we want you to be able to share that experience with someone else. We don't want you to feel like it's just me, I'm the only one that is having trouble keeping track of all of these things. So we really want you to start off with someone that you feel like you can lean on. With that said, we designed this project in such a way that you can kind of work on it separately or maybe even in parallel, and you don't necessarily need your partner's code to complete the project. And that will make a little bit more sense as I go through this. So really the point of this being pair project is more for support and less of we need to team up to get this large amount of work done. I will say that our group project is more of a team effort where everybody needs to contribute to get a big project done. So what are we learning in this first project? So our learning goals are we want to design a one-to-many relationship using a schema designer. The pre-work of Task Manager walked you through building a app when we only have one resource or table or model. These are all kind of related things. When you really only have like one noun that you're dealing with. So the noun in Task Manager was tasks. Now we're going to layer in the concept of two different things, and they're going to be related to each other. So an example of that is something like pets and shelters. So as I kind of talk through this project, I'm going to use pets and shelters as my example. You are going to come up with your own example on your own. We're also going to have to write migrations. So we'll talk a lot about migrations this first week here. We're going to use Rails to create our web pages that's going to allow us to CRUD resources. We're going to create instance and class methods on our models. We kind of started that today. We made an instance method on our task model. And we want to make sure that we're testing everything. So we're going to write both model and feature test. Started talking about model testing today. Feature test is going to be another category of tests. So this is slightly out of date here. It says must use Rails 5.2.4. We're on Rails 5.2.5. The important thing is the first two numbers, 5.2. That is the major version of Rails. So we should all be on some version of 5.2. I believe, I forget who it was, but someone reached out to me over intermission and said, hey, it looks like my app is running 5.2.6 now rather than 5.2.5. Is that an issue? Not an issue at all. I don't know exactly why that's happening. But if I go back over to my task manager that I've been making, if I do a Rails-V here, I wonder, yeah, this one even says that I'm on 5.2.6. So if you're on 5.2.6, that's fine, as long as you're on some flavor of 5.2, and ideally it's on 5.2.5 and above. If you follow the install instructions from our pre-work, that should be a non-issue. You must use Postgres. Again, if you just follow the intermission work, you should be set up and ready to go with Postgres. And you must hand roll all of your routes, meaning you should not have resources in your routes file. We're going to talk about resources later in the mod. For now, we don't want you using resources. So if you Google things on like, how do I do this in Rails? And it has some code in the routes file, most likely you will see this resources keyword. Avoid doing that for this first project. So this is the relevant part of what Zach and I were talking about. If there's a specific gem that you would like to use on the project that we haven't mentioned here, just ask us. We're pretty, the ones that we've talked about already would be Bootstrap or Foundation. If you want to use either of those for styling, totally fine to use those. And then here's our rubric. I don't need to go through all of this right now in great detail. With all of our rubrics, we just really want to recommend that you are looking at these at the beginning of the project so that you kind of know what we are expecting to see by the end of the project. It's also a good idea to check in on the rubric on maybe like halfway through the project and just make sure, am I on track? So our big things that we're looking to see for this first project are, number one, just completion. Like, did you do the things we're asking you to do? Yep. And then for the Rails section here, for passing, we're looking at routing. It should be organized and RESTful. We'll talk more about REST later. And you should be able to understand how the data is passed through your application. Database design, that's going to be the first part of the project that we'll get into next. Active record, are you using your active record helpers? This is going to be our active record associations. We'll have a class on that later. Are you using active record over Ruby to process data? We'll talk about that with our SQL and active record class on Friday. And then testing, are you using model and feature testing is really what we want to see. So those are the big things that we're emphasizing on this first project. All right, so that's kind of like the overview of the project. Yeah, let's talk about the specifics. So the first thing that you need to do for this project is you need to come up with your relationships and you need to design your database. So the first thing here says read this lesson plan and use it as a reference. This links to the one-to-many relationships. If you look on the calendar, the next hour, the 3 to 4 hour, is one-to-many exploration. So we set aside some time for you to go ahead and start reading this lesson plan. This is good information to have, and this will tie into our Active Record Associations class on Thursday. So go ahead and read this now, and you can use this to start designing your database, but we will kind of circle back to this later in the week. So we're going to have partners for this project. Each partner is going to come up with their own one-to-many relationship. So this should represent a real-world example. So for example, shelters and pets. This is what I mentioned earlier. You should be able to describe your one-to-many relationship using the words has many and belongs to. So a shelter would have many pets. A pet would belong to a shelter. So if you imagine a pet that is ready to be adopted, it is located at a single shelter, and that shelter has many of those pets that they could put up for adoption. Now, with this relationship, and probably with a lot of your relationships, you might think, maybe that could be a many-to-many. So for example, maybe a pet could actually be a part of many shelters. So maybe for this week, it's at this shelter, and then it goes to this shelter. So maybe there's a world where it could be a many-to-many relationship. For this project, we're going to not think about many-to-many relationships. We're going to add many-to-many for the next project. So you want to think of a real-world example where you could describe the relationship as a one-to-many. The lesson plan that's linked here with one-to-many relationships will use songs and artists as that example. So an artist has many songs. A song belongs to an artist. Don't use parent-child as your relationship. That's just one caveat here, just because that will come into play with other descriptions in this project. So these relationships are yours to create. And we are happy to provide feedback. If you want to just shoot us a Slack message, we can say, hey, this looks good. You can say like, hey, this is what I was thinking. Do you think this would work? And we're happy to answer you that. So after you come up with your relationship, you are going to use this database design website. And this is pretty straightforward. I don't really need to go over this with you all, but what you should come up with is something like this. So this is two different one-to-many relationships. So we have shelters and pets over here, and then we also have another relationships of veterinary offices and veterinarians. So a veterinarian office would have many veterinarians. Veterinarians would belong to a veterinarian office. In this example, these two relationships do kind of go together between like vets and pets, but they don't have to go together. So we've seen students do things like breweries and beers. So a single brewery has many beers, a beer belongs to a brewery, and then the other relationship is like a store and an employee. So one store has many employees. So they do not need to be related in any way. where you could do like ships and you could do like a, what's the term, like a dock and ships. So a dock would have many ships, a ship belongs to a dock, and beers and breweries. Relationships don't have to be related. If you want to make them related, that's fine. That can be fun. You can kind of like play off of each other and have like kind of a theme, but not a requirement. So for these relationships and these tables that you're creating, so you learned a little bit you did a little bit of background research in your intermission work. Our tables are going to have columns on them, and we will talk more about this tomorrow. You can make whatever columns you want, but we do have some base requirements for these columns. So every table should have a string column for a name. It should have a Boolean column, it should have a numeric column, and it should have 2 date time columns for created at and updated at. So if I look at our examples here, we have a shelter. Let's actually look at a pet. So a pet has a Boolean column for adoptable. So are true or false, are they adoptable? They have an integer column as an age, and they have a name column for a string. So those are the required fields. Oh, in addition to created at and updated at. And it looks like this example also includes a breed column. So that would be an additional string column that wouldn't be necessary. But as we said, you can make whatever columns you want, as long as you're meeting those base requirements for one integer, one numeric, one Boolean, and 2 date columns, and 1 name. Also note that numeric doesn't have to be an integer. This could be a float too. It could be a decimal value. So maybe it's like a rating that allows you to do like, a rating of 5.5 or something. That would be totally fine. A couple things to keep in mind as you're designing these. Your foreign keys do not count as an integer column. So you read a little bit about foreign keys in the intermission work, and this exploration for the one-to-many lesson right here, we'll talk more about foreign keys. Those foreign keys do not count as one of your numeric integer columns. And then the second point here, this is a little bit more complicated. You should not create columns that duplicate data. So for example, if we have pets and shelters, a shelter should not store a pet count, because you can calculate the number of pets by finding the number of associated pet records. So in this example, if we were storing pet count over here on shelters, that would also be duplicated by counting the number of these pet records. So you want to try to avoid that scenario. That's something that we can talk about in our check-ins. So our schema design is the thing that we will really want to be checking in at our first check-in. So Jameson talked to you all this morning about our project check-ins. We as instructors will have some things that we want to check in on those check-ins. This is an example. We're going to review the schema in that first project check-in. And please, as Jameson recommended, please also come with additional questions that might come. All right, so I've been talking for a while. That's the first phase of the project. What questions do you all have? No.
This is kind of simple, but in that DB designer, so we're making little tables in there, and we're setting up essentially a diagram in it, and then we're choosing the kind of rows that we're kind of trying to create and the data type that goes in those rows. That's the basic premise of that exercise, right?
That was all really good. One thing that I'll say is that you're not really creating any rows, because the rows are the actual pieces of data. So okay. the table name and the columns is kind of like what the type of data that you're storing. A row is an actual piece of data. So an example row for a pet would be this pet with this ID of 2, the shelter ID of 4, created at of today, Monday, May 10th, at whatever, adoptable, true, age 12, breed, golden retriever, name, Samson. A row would be the actual record of hard data, versus this diagram is just saying, what in general are we storing in those tables? Does that make sense, Noah? Yeah. But yeah, everything else, yep, you've got it. We're just creating a diagram for what this is going to look like. In the future, we won't need to create these diagrams because there are tools that will create them for us. But especially for this first time doing it, we really want to be intentional with what we are creating. Let's hear from Molly.
Hey, I have two kind of brief questions, and one of them is just, even though our relationships are kind of can be independent, we're doing it in the same app, like we're only calling Rails new once. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So one partner says Rails new and adds the other as the collaborator on GitHub.
Okay. And my other question is about the rubric on the database design stuff. A couple of things at the top, like it says migration history reflects table alterations not taught in class. And I'm just like, I like looked through kind of ahead and was running like what you meant by that, or like what other kind of stuff you'd be looking for? Is that just like seeding our database, or like is there other stuff that is like interesting there that we should look at?
Really, the best way that I can say this is making mistakes and fixing them with migrations. So for example, I named my column, like I made a typo in my column. So an example migration that we wouldn't teach in class would be, I accidentally named this breed column bread. I forgot the E. So I make another migration to fix that typo. That would be an example of something we didn't do in class. Yeah.
Okay.
Lawrence.
So just so I'm understanding correctly, we have one GitHub repository, and are we each going to be responsible for one of these relationships? Is the idea that we work, that each partner does one relationship, or are we doing 4 total?
Each partner does one relationship. You are going to have 4 total tables, just like this diagram is here, in your project. So
Okay.
1 repo, 2 collaborators, 4 tables, 2 one-to-many relationships.
Right. Okay. I guess I was
the idea with the pair project is you don't necessarily need to work together on it, but we're not gonna tell you how to work. You can essentially do whatever you want. Okay. So last mod, students paired all the way through it. They just said, okay, we'll each design our own relationship, but then when we go to like build it out, we're just gonna work together on it. Other students kind of divided and conquered a little bit more. Some paired on parts of it. So I would really just leave it up to you all to kind of DTR with your partner and talk about like what's gonna work best for you all. This is kind of a theme throughout Turing, but we want to like slowly release that responsibility and let you all make more decisions with how you work and what your workflow is and all that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Regina.
This might be a silly question, and I might supposed to know it already, but what is a user story? Like kind of.
That is a good question. Yeah, we have not been over user stories. That's not something that you should have known. That is something that we'll talk about in the feature testing class, which is Wednesday. Yes, it is Wednesday, but that's also going to come up in one of our homework videos, which will kick off tomorrow. So yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Thank you.
Welcome. Natia?
Is there any need for our schema to relate to our partner schema in any way, shape, or form?
No, not necessary. All right. So that's the first phase of the project, designing some database stuff. We're going to check in on it on Thursday. And if you want to get feedback ahead of time, shoot us a Slack message. We'll be happy to look at it. So now let's talk about the user stories. Very briefly, user stories describe how a user should be able to interact with your website. So in these stories, we're going to refer to, so you build a one-to-many relationship. We're going to refer to the one side as the parent and the many side as the children. So that's why we didn't want you to do parent-child, because we're going to use that as kind of our terminology in this project. So if we're talking about pets and shelters, the shelter is the one side of the relationship. One shelter has many pets. So we would refer to the shelter as the parent and the pet as the children. Lee?
Would you mind repeating just that little quick quip that you said about the user story? You said it describes how the user uses the...
It describes how the users interact with our web application.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Lawrence?
With these numbers, are we going to have both both relationships on the same page, or is that saying you should have two shelters visible on your first page?
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, okay, so let's get into these. Let me finish up real quick with these other points here. I think this is pretty straightforward. Children, no, you're good. Children belong to a parent. Anywhere you see child table name, think pets from pets and shelters. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. So all of our user stories, we're going to group them into 3 categories, which kind of align with well, I'll just say the 3 categories are going to be active record, CRUD functionality, and usability. So active record is, we'll talk a lot about active record this week and throughout this mod. Active record is our database interactions. We use, our models are going to use active record. Remember, the models are like the connection to the database. CRUD functionality, this is really what you did in Task Manager. You giving the ability to create, read, update, and destroy something. And then usability, this refers to how usable is the site. So can you navigate it? Are there links and buttons to reach different parts of the page? And we've broken it into iterations. So for iteration 1, we've got a couple CRUD stories here. We've got a couple active record stories, and then we've got a couple usability stories. And then iteration 1 is what we're going to focus in on in the second check-in. So the idea here is that each iteration, you'll kind of get a little bit of everything. And each iteration is going to progressively get harder with what you have to do for each section. So for the specific sections, here's an example of a user story. It says user story 1, parent index times 2. So for each parent table, as a visitor, when I visit /parents, then I see the name of each parent record in the system. So if you put yourself in a user's shoes, they click up here, they go to your website, which for now will be hosted on localhost 3000 / and then let's say we're doing shelters. I would expect to see all the names of all the shelters, but I don't right now. My Rails server is not running, reasons. So I would have to build out my app to make this work. So that's the idea here. And the ×2 and the for each parent table is referring to both one-to-many relationships. So in using our examples of pet shelters and veterinarian offices, this would mean that we would want to have a shelters index page and a veterinarian office index page. So ×2 is referring to each parent table should have this index page. So if you're if you're splitting up the project evenly, so one partner is doing their relationship, the other partner is doing their relationship, each partner should make an index page for their parent, for the parent side of the relationship, or the one side of the relationship. Any questions on that? I want to make sure that that's clear before I move on. So for all of these stories that say ×2, you're doing this you're doing this twice, one for each corresponding side of the relationship. Okay. And I think that is pretty straightforward. So then we'll have different user stories for each one of those. And yeah, I don't think I need to go into these specific user stories anymore. I think the ×2 is the only thing that's like kind of confusing. Noah.
I'm curious what resources we should look to. My first instinct is really just to look back at Task Manager for most of this, but some of this will get beyond that. And I guess I'm sure it's listed in a thing, but maybe something you'd recommend.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So for the first part of the project, what you should be doing is you should be working on this database design. So working on this lesson plan, trying to design your one-to-many relationship. And then for the first couple user stories, yes, you should be leaning on what you did in Task Manager and trying to do something very similar in this project. So if we think about your learning in terms of like iterations, iteration 1, follow this tutorial. Iteration 2, do something very similar, but swap out the noun. So now rather than tasks, do it with pets or whatever your relationship is. And then our final iteration is going to be to do like some more complicated things that we haven't shown you how to do. I think I'm going to save this for tomorrow. But Jameson and I have recorded some videos that kind of walk through some of the more complicated things. And you should also be able to lean on those when you get to some more of the complicated stories. I will also say that one thing that you want to avoid is unproductive struggle. Is unproductive struggle something you talked about in Mod 1? Yeah. So what you don't want to do is like get to a point on the project where you're just like, okay, so let's say we're working on parent index, that goes pretty well. Parent show, that goes pretty well. Child index, that's all going pretty well. And then we get to parent children index. And now all of a sudden our route here is maybe a little bit more, it's different than what we've seen so far. What I wouldn't want you to do is I wouldn't want you to get to this point in the project and spend like all night trying to figure out this one user story. What I would prefer that you do is you do something else that makes you feel like you are productively struggling, whether that's reviewing a lesson, watching a recording, working on an exercise, doing something else. We don't want you to just focus so much in on the project that you fall into unproductive struggle. So I think especially for these first couple of days, you might not be able to get very far in the project. You might just say, okay, I've kind of maxed out what I know so far. I'm gonna spend my time trying to understand what we did in class so that you can move faster through the project later. The idea is that by the end of this project, you should be able to build out CRUD functionality very quickly. CRUD functionality should be like, not easy, but it should be a lot quicker than the first time you did. Susie.
Yeah, I was just curious about the consistency you'd like to see between the pairs projects. Like, so in terms of things like syntax, like spacing, or like, are those things you'd be checking in on? Like, I don't know.
I don't think consistency is quite the right word. We do want to make sure, we do want to use like some specific Ruby styles. I would say we don't get as detailed as maybe we did earlier. I forget exactly, oops, that's not what I wanted. I forget exactly who brought it up, but we talked about, where's my spec? We talked about like adding a blank line in between these two. That's something that I probably wouldn't like go out of my way to mention, but an example of something that we do care about is indentation. So if your code looks like this, I'm gonna make a comment about that because I can't really read this very well. So I'd say you don't necessarily need to be consistent between partners, but there are some consistent Ruby styles that we want to see you use, mostly for readability. So this right here, not very readable versus, I don't know if you all have seen this, but you can do edit lines auto indent. It's pretty helpful.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Susan?
Yeah, that does. And I was just wondering, so the only thing that really ties your pair project partner and your work together is the theme of the schema that you choose, right?
Yeah, exactly. And as we mentioned earlier, they don't have to be related. So if you and your partner choose two different, like completely different things, then your app, it might kind of feel like you're building like two different projects together in kind of a weird way, but that's okay. For this first project, we're really, and really for our most of the mod, we're focused on learning. So if it doesn't quite feel like a app that makes sense, like an app that's really usable, that's okay. By the time we get to the group project, that's where we're going to build an e-commerce site that kind of feels like a shop that someone could actually use.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Natia?
So this might be obvious, but is the purpose of the database website just to help us blueprint, and then we're actually recreating or creating everything in Rails without like exporting from this website and importing it in a migration?
Correct. This database website is just a diagram for you all to like use and reference, but you will not import it into your project. It's something that would be nice to link in your README of your project, but it doesn't. It's not going to like affect your code at all. And this is a practice that is pretty common before we start a big project. We want to try and design our database schema ahead of time so that we don't build things that we don't need. Or we don't build things. We try to build things as close to what we want as possible the first time.
Okay. And one follow-up question is, do we need to worry about sizes of the fields, or is that irrelevant?
No, you don't need to worry about that. Just for some context, over in this column, it might say like parentheses like 255 or something to indicate how big it is. We don't need to concern ourselves with that. If we were really like, if we were a school, if we were like, rather than backend engineering, we were database administration, then we would probably want to talk about that, but it's not super important. Noah.
And we are not forking anything here where we're creating this Rails DB whole cloth.
You're creating everything from scratch. Yep. So just like with Task Manager, when you ran Rails new, you're going to be doing the same thing. I think that's about everything. We don't need to go over these exact user stories. Extensions, I'll just say really quick, feel free if you finish this, and it seems like there's a fair amount of folks in this cohort who maybe like have some experience that you might be able to move faster through this project. If you get to the extensions, feel free to make whatever extensions you want. So for example, if you're really interested in styling and making this app look really nice, feel free to ignore our extensions and do that. That's totally fine. You can use our extensions as well. Yeah, really, once you get to these extensions, this applies for all of our projects. We really want you to feel like you have room to do whatever you want. Extension work can really be whatever you make it. But of course, we do provide some suggested extensions. All right, that's everything that I wanted to cover with you all. Any other questions? Besides, who is my pair? Gunnar?
Well, yeah, Bob, I was just about to ask about partners, but you beat me to it.
Gotcha. Wait, just another, give you all another, we'll stay on this call, let's say for another couple minutes, and give you all a chance to look through this and see if anything else comes up. In our one thing before we break, this exploration that I'm going to have you all do next is it refers to the set list app, and it might say things like let's take a step back and review what it. No, that's not what I'm looking for. Right now in our app, we have a database that is storing song information. We used to do this lesson a little bit later in the week, so you might see some phrasing that might not make sense. Like now we have a database that has a songs table. We haven't made it yet, but we will get there eventually. That is okay because this lesson is conceptual. There's no code in here, so it really shouldn't change anything for y'all. Does anyone have any questions from the day? Just we've had a long day today. Anything coming up that you're wondering about before? This will be our breaking point for the day before we get back tomorrow morning. Gunnar?
I guess my question is like in terms of like from mod 1 where it was kind of like I kind of looked at the schedule, and mod 1 it just seems like we had class, do this. Whereas so far what I'm kind of getting from mod 2 is like we still have a lot to do, but it's a lot. I feel like you get a lot more freedom and free time to do research. I guess how I would frame it. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're picking up on the right thing. And I said this a little bit earlier, but the idea is that we do a release of responsibility. I think we like to say gradual release of responsibility. I think sometimes it can feel more like a cliff of responsibility. But yes, we do want to try to make some more space, intentionally make space in mod 2 and beyond for you all to have some more flexibility, some more time for exploration, research on your own. And we're really going to try to push you all towards research. We're going to try and make sure and push you all towards looking things up on your own, because ultimately that's what you're going to be doing in your job. All right, incoming project pairs. Check the cohort channel. They're up. Natia.
One quick question on text versus string. Is text just like a group of words and string would be one?
No, a string could still be multiple words. You're referring to the database on the database designer, right? So instead of this string, you could make this like text.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would prefer string over text. I don't know exactly what the difference is. I would imagine the text is just a longer string. That would be my guess. Gunnar?
Hello. Yes. Hello. In the group of 3, would you like us to do like I guess two each? Like, is it still going to be same format of just all that, but just all 3 of us will be on just one?
Yeah, exactly. So everywhere it says 2, just do 3. So each one of you should have a relationship. So you should have 3. So this diagram would just have a third relationship over here. Now, rather than 2 parent indexes, you would have 3 parent indexes, et cetera, et cetera.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Is everybody listed? I know there was some like attendance shuffling this morning. Does everybody listed on here and have a partner? And Can everybody confirm that their partner is in this mod? They've seen them today. I think we're good on that front. All right, y'all. Well, I am going to close it out here. You've got that one-to-many exploration. I'd also highly recommend that you DTR with your partner. Along with that theme of release of responsibility, we are not going to have you submit your DTRs. We're not going to, did you all do feedback surveys in Mod 1 where you submitted feedback for your partner? Yeah, so we don't have those surveys in Mod 2, but we would still highly, highly encourage you to take what you learned in Mod 1 and apply it to Mod 2. So we're not checking in on the DTR, we're not checking in on the feedback, but still very good practices that we recommend that you do. So do a DTR, do your one-to-many exploration, and I think it'd be a good idea to also debrief the exploration with your partner. Get together with them, see what they thought, ask each other follow-up questions. Yeah. Thank you all very much for your time and attention today. I know this was a long day. We'll look forward to getting into intro to databases and ORMs tomorrow morning. So we'll see you all then.